Well, hey there, Vineyard family. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Christina Lowery, and I am the Associate National Director of Church Health and Development. I'm really excited that all of you have joined us today for our webcast, which is titled Leadership Pathway. And really what we're hoping to address today is how to solve the leadership shortage in your church. I know that's something that every single pastor, no matter the church size, faces. And so I'm so excited to be joined today by Mac Lake, who is the founder of Multiply Group, and he's also written a book called The Multiplication Effect. I know some of you picked that book up at our national conference, and I'm just super excited to introduce you in just a moment. But first, I wanted to kind of open up with some vision for the webcast today and maybe just say a quick word of prayer before we get started. So within the church health world, my hope and prayer is that we are really aiming to help revitalize churches who are in a state of decline or have plateaued and are hitting, that barrier of growing past the size of your church that you're at right now. So hopefully, that we're able to help bring life back into your vision and bring clarity to your vision. So revitalizing churches, we also hope to help reinforce churches that are healthy and growing and thriving. And ultimately, the reason why we want to revitalize and reinforce those healthy churches is so that we can reproduce healthy churches. And eventually, we would love to see Vineyard churches multiplying all over our country. And so, as you look at what does multiplication mean, what we have found is that multiplication begins at the very base level of making disciples who make disciples. Essentially, it's leading like Jesus did. And Mac Lake, who's with us today, has been a training expert, a consultant to churches, many, many churches. He's written a lot of incredible material, and I'm just could not be more thrilled to have Mac come and share with us today. So I want to welcome Mac to the screen.
I'm here.
There he is. Hey, Mac. It's so good to see you. And thank you so much for joining us today on the webcast.
Oh man, I've been looking forward to this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, just for everybody's sake, the format that we're going to go about is I'll have a couple of questions for Mac, and we'll go about this for a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to questions for everyone else. So you've already seen when we first started, there will be a Q&A feature here. You can start to enter those questions as they come up, and we'll take some time at the end of our time together to answer some of those questions. So just starting right off, Mac, we would love to hear your background and maybe why you became so passionate about developing leaders.
Yeah, great question. So I was born and raised in a little country church in West Virginia and gave my life to Christ at 9 years old. And I just developed a passionate relationship with Christ. The problem was I was extremely shy. I was a very backward kid. I was voted the shyest kid in my ninth grade class. Couldn't look people in the eye. I was so shy, but I loved Jesus and I loved my church. And I just felt this compulsion to do something with my life. And, but just sort of ruled myself out because I knew I was too shy. I was not good with people. So over the years, I felt led to go to Bible college. So I went to Bible college and got my degree, but still thinking, how am I going to do it? And I sort of got over my shy part. So I was able to get into ministry. I was a youth pastor, and I wasn't in ministry too long till the group of parents pulled me aside one day and they said, Mac, we like you. We really like you. You're a nice guy. You're not a leader. And they told me, and basically what they told me is what is so true, Christine, of so many church staff. They basically told me, you're a doer, not a leader. And so I was the youth pastor. And so if we had an event, I would go buy the food, I would plan the games, I would plan the devotion, I would lead the evening. I did it all. I was a doer. I never even thought about developing leaders. And so that hurt, but I really didn't know what to do about it. And then when I was in seminary, a pastor, for some reason, pastor of our church said, Mac, I want to start meeting with you every week. I'm going to give you an article on leadership, a cassette to listen to on leadership. And I want you to show up in my office every week. And I want you to ask me questions, leadership questions. And so I showed up every week. I'd ask questions, take notes. And after a period of time, he began to just switch things and go, okay, that's a good question. Tell me what you think. And he started pushing me to answer my own questions. And for 2 years, he did this with me. Wow. And not only did it increase my competence, it increased my confidence. And this transition happened. I call it a conversion. I went from being a doer to a leader. I now understood what a leader was and what Jesus wanted me to do as a leader. So I truly began to lead people. And then later on, even learned, okay, I need another conversion from leader to developer, because a lot of times people get in ministry, but they're leading, but they're leading everything and they're not developing others to do what they do. So that just became my passion, because I was this young country kid who wanted to do something for Jesus, but nobody was developing me. But when that pastor did, it changed my life.
It's so fascinating, and you think how many people are sitting in our churches every Sunday who don't look like a leader at all. And we probably had those thoughts, like they're great doers, but yet if we would take the time to invest into them, as that pastor did for you, goodness.
Here's what he did. Here's what he did. And I tell people this all the time. He didn't look at me for what I was. He looked at me for what I could be 12 months from then, if he poured into me. And that's the way we got to look at people. When Jesus recruited, some of his guys, especially Matthew wasn't ready, but he was willing. And so often in the church, what we do, we look around the landscape of our church and we go, there's no leaders here. There's not enough leaders. He's not ready. He's not ready. He's not ready. Then we find somebody that's ready and we put them in a leadership position and we celebrate that. But that's not leadership development. That's leadership placement. And there's a huge difference between leadership development and leadership placement. And I'm afraid the American church has defaulted to that which is quick or seems quick, which is leadership placement versus leadership development. Therefore, we're only looking for people who are ready, and we're not looking for people who are willing.
Right. And one way I've heard it said is we need to move from fishing for leaders to farming our leaders and raising them. Yeah. So, well, what would you say? Because I kind of hinted at it at the beginning, it all starts with discipleship. So what would you say is there a difference between discipleship and leadership development?
Yeah. So, I know that could be a heavy debate. And what I say is there is a nuanced difference between the two. And it's really illustrated in my story, because when that pastor put his arm around me and began to disciple me in leadership, I was 26, 27 years old. And so at 26 years old, I had developed a character where I was, as best I knew how, I was following Christ. I needed somebody to develop my competency. At 26, I knew how to lead myself. I mean, I was doing a good job leading myself. I didn't have a clue how to lead others. I needed somebody to disciple me how to lead others. In discipleship, it's primarily about intimacy with Jesus. But when you're discipling a leader, now it's about influence for Jesus. And so it really boils down to, in discipleship, you're helping somebody live like Jesus. In leadership development, you're discipling them to lead like Jesus. So to me, leadership development is a continuation of the discipleship process.
Which brings me to my next question. And that's really where the gold is in what you do, is that You help churches to develop what you call a leadership pipeline. I know in the Vineyard, we've been using language of a pathway, but it's essentially the same thing. So leadership pipeline, leadership pathway. So can you explain to us what this leadership pipeline looks like, and why would you say it is so valuable to this leadership development that we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, leadership pipeline for me, my discovery of it was when I was at Seacoast Church. And it was in the early stages when we were just early in the multi-site. And so Pastor Greg handed me a book called The Leadership Pipeline by Ram Sharan. He said, read this and figure it out for the church, because we knew we needed to figure out how to develop people up to campus pastor role. And so I read the book, not an easy read whatsoever. It's a tough read. And so I read the book, but it had a radical transformation on my perception of leadership development. So I'm going to screen share real quick, and that way I can give a visual of it. And oh, it disappeared. Where did it go? Okay, let me try again. There it is. All right, can you see that? Okay, so the leadership pipeline, the concept is real simple. Basically, it says everybody starts here. The largest pool of people in your organization or your church, it's people who are leading themselves. And these are people who are attending the church. They're serving as an usher, a greeter. They're attending a small group. Some of those people flow up and they begin to lead others. And so this is where you get your leaders from. So their next step is to begin to lead a guest service team, to lead a small group, adult small group, kids small group, student small group. It's from those pool of people, some of those will flow up and they'll lead leaders. And so a common terminology for this might be small group coach or elementary coordinator, preschool coordinator, that sort of thing. And then some of those flow up and they lead a ministry area or a department. And this becomes your student director, your children's director, small groups director, guest service director. And then some of those flow up to lead the church. And so that's your senior pastors, it's your executive pastor, executive team, that sort of thing. And so what happens is when I read the book, I was like, oh my goodness, this is brilliant. It is a discipleship pathway for leaders. Churches do a good job down here. They have things like Rooted or Alpha that really help people learn how to follow Christ. But where we trip and fall is when we take somebody that now is living like Jesus and we say, okay, we're going to put you in leadership. And so because you're living like Jesus, you must be able to lead. So we throw them in the swimming pool of leadership, just like my father-in-law. It's the way he taught his son Kip to swim. He threw him in the swimming pool and he figured it out. And that's what we do. We throw them in the swimming pool of leadership. But here's the problem. Most people crawl to the side of the pool. They get out, they shake off, and they go, I'm never getting near the pool of leadership again, because that almost killed me. That was a horrible experience. It was traumatic. And so when I learned to swim, a guy got in the pool and said, all right, I'm going to hold you. Here's how you do this. And I wasn't afraid of the water. And so that's what we've got to do with leaders. And so this whole concept, I was like, oh my goodness, we can begin to disciple people at new levels of leadership. And we teach them to be leaders of others before we teach them how to lead leaders. That's essential, because every time you move to the next level of the pipeline or the next step in the pathway, actually, when you take the next step in the pathway as a disciple, then you have to learn new competencies. The way you use time changes. Your values have to change a little bit. There's a lot that changes, but we don't teach people that. We just make them figure it out on their own, and that can be dangerous for them and dangerous for the church, because we have somebody that's not been developed as a leader. They just been thrown in as a leader.
Right. So, you mentioned this book, The Leadership Pipeline, and that is, I'm assuming, a business book. What would you say to anyone that might see leadership development as a business concept rather than developing church leaders and developing, helping build them
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. So I was on site taking a church through the leadership pipeline process. And after my first session, during my first session, I noticed a grumpy guy sitting there like this, arms crossed, and could tell. I was like, man, this guy does not like me, and he does not like what I'm saying. And so during the break, I went to the pastor and I was like, hey, did I say something wrong? I mean, man, I mean, it's very clear darts are coming at me from this guy's eyes. He said, oh, ignore him. He doesn't believe leadership development belongs in the church. And I said, oh, okay. Well, he's getting ready to have his mind blown because I'm getting ready to share something. And so I'm going to screen share again. And I want to show you something, something interesting. Let's see here. Let me go back a little bit. It's when you study, I've done a lot of study of the life of Christ in chronological order. And when you study the life of Christ in chronological order, you discover that there are only 52 snapshots. If Jesus had an Instagram, there are only 52 days that we get a look into his life. Wow. And so what that tells me is it's not only important to know what Jesus did, but why he did it. And so if you look at this chart right here, this is the life of Christ laid out in chronological order. And so as I was studying the chronological order of his life as public ministry, I wasn't getting a grasp on it until I laid it out 26 through 30, winter, spring, summer, fall. Mm-hmm. And so this is fascinating because let me skip down to a different slide right here. Okay, right here, this is Jesus' baptism, it's his temptation. And here he meets 5 of what was going to become his apostles. And they looked at him and they said, where are you staying? They just met him. First day they met him, he said, come and see. So he invites them into a conversation. He responds to their curiosity. Now, they go with him back up to Galilee, and they experience the wedding at Cana, and they experience that miracle. But then they go home to Capernaum, and Jesus, he goes home to Nazareth and does a little bit of touring through some cities, but they're not with him. And so what's fascinating is, a year later, 1 year later, actually 9 months later, Jesus moves to Capernaum, where a lot of these guys lived. And then 1 year after he first met them, he said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. And so that is not an invitation into leadership. It's an invitation into discipleship and followership. So look how much time he took before inviting them into that official discipleship relationship. And then 9 months later, he goes up on a mountain in Luke 6. He prays all night long. The Greek word that Luke uses means to pray throughout the night without ceasing. Why did he do that? Because he's getting ready to make the most strategic decision in his public ministry. He's getting ready to select the 12 leaders that he will pour his life into. And so he takes that before God and prays all night long. And Luke says he goes down to the bottom of the mountain that next morning. He calls his disciples to himself. We don't know how many, but probably a large crowd, because the popularity of his ministry at this point had skyrocketed. And it says, from among them, he chose 12. So it's this point where Jesus, 21 months into his public ministry, Jesus begins to do leadership development with 12. Mm-hmm. Now, these 6 months right here are crucial because this is where he's apprenticing. They're apprenticing under him. He's giving them key information, key experiences. And what's fascinating is in these 6 months right here, it begins by saying Jesus selected 12 apostles, but right up here, 6 months later, it says he gave them authority and power. So he trained them first, and then he empowered them. And that's when he sent them out. Two by two. I got these in the wrong order. It's where he sent them out 2 by 2. And what did he tell them when he sent them out 2 by 2? Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth workers. In other words, guys, I need you to start raising up new leaders. Do for them what I did for you. And During 29 AD, Jesus did 4 retreats where he withdrew out of the boundaries of Israel to do just intensive training with his 12. And so, and then obviously over here in the end in Matthew 28, he sends them out to go make disciples of all nations. He sends them out on mission. So when I look at that, it's very clear 21 months of building relationships, vetting relationships, getting to know people, and then strategically saying, I'm picking these 12. Now I'm going to spend a disproportionate amount of time with these few in order to impact the many, because Jesus was starting a multiplication movement, not an addition movement. And so then 24 months of intense development with them. I look at that and go, man, it's clear as day he was discipling them to lead the way he led.
Yes. One thing that struck me looking at the chart was even the act of raising them up, discipling them, and developing them as leaders. That you see a transformation process, them becoming apostles. And the big piece that stuck out to me was that piece of like releasing them. Like he could have just, kept them together and said, let's just build something right here. But these are his 12 best guys. And then he releases them to go and begin this movement that we all know we're all a part of today.
And what I love about this is they weren't fully ready. They weren't fully developed. If you look at 29 AD, there are 2 episodes. Now that was, he was a year, less than a year away from going to the cross. There are 2 episodes where the apostles were arguing who was the greatest. At the Last Supper, they were arguing who was going to be the greatest. So were they fully developed? No. A few years ago, I was working in an organization and I left there, and I had raised up 3 people to do what I do and take certain roles. And my last week there, I said, all right, you guys, I got you 81% ready. And they went, what? What are you talking about 81% ready? I said, I can only develop you to 81%. The final 19% you learn once you put on the shoes. And I said, right now, you don't even know. There are certain questions you don't even know to ask. And there's certain information you can't receive from me because it won't make sense, but it will when you put the shoes on. And you can call me. I'm staying out of your business. I'm leaving. I'm moving on to start a company. You can call me anytime you want. I don't want them to be dependent on me, but I wanted them to understand, hey, listen, this final part, you're going to learn because you're stepping in the shoes. And that is not only going to increase your competence, it's going to increase your confidence because now you're discovering more on your own. And so don't wait till you have somebody 100% ready.
That's right. I mean, I don't think I was ready when I got pushed into my leadership role. So for sure. And this actually leads into just something that we're looking at in the Vineyard. And I know that this is a crisis beyond the Vineyard. And that is that we're looking at over the next 5 years, seeing to churches transition senior leadership. And the reason why I would call that a crisis is because many of these churches do not have someone that's been raised up to take over the church, and even like having a net of people that could potentially come in from the outside. That's just something that we're like trying to figure out and look into. And I think that this kind of speaks into my next question of here we have a lot of great Vineyard churches that have no leadership to take over in the next generation. And then, looking at church planters and all the other, leaders of a church that we're kind of in a deficit right now. Why do you think that the Big C church is struggling to disciple leaders, to raise up and develop leaders?
Yeah. Number one, we're in a hurry to do it. The American church wants leadership development to be fast, easy, and linear. It's not. It's discipling of leaders is slow, it's messy, and it's customized to the individual that you're discipling. I'm discipling 3 guys in leadership right now. And me included, there are aspects of our lives that are messy, but there's one guy in my group, man, he's just struggling right now. He's just struggling with some stuff right now. It's messy, but you know what? Just continue to work together, continue to disciple him in leadership. And so I think the number one reason is we're in too big of a hurry. We're not willing to slow down and disciple the way Jesus did. And looking and going, wow, Jesus took 21 months before he selected him. He took 24 months to fully develop him. I'm not saying it has to take that long, but we certainly got to slow down, because this shadowing somebody for 2 weeks and throwing them in leadership, or doing a turbo training for 2 hours on a Sunday and throwing them in leadership, all we're doing is dumping information. And that's the second problem, is the American church believes that dumping information produces transformation. It doesn't. I mean, when I was trained as a church planter, I sat there for 2 days and listened to 8 hours of lecture a day and filled in a notebook with 273 fill in the blanks. And I know that trainer went home and he celebrated, hey, I just trained 25 church planters. I went home and said, honey, I still don't know how to plant a church. And so I had the opportunity to write church plant training curriculum several years ago. And it is, I designed that curriculum to be done in cohorts of no bigger than 5, with an experienced church planter leading the training. And there's no lecture in the training whatsoever. It's highly interactive, because transformation takes place through that interaction. The third reason that I think the American church struggles to disciple leaders is we've never had a pattern to watch. Until that pastor discipled me that way, the only thing I think he could have done different is brought somebody else into that group, because I prefer versus one-on-one. I prefer one-on-2 or one-on-3. It's a bigger, there's more bang for your buck. And so I think we've not modeled that well. And here's what I've discovered when I did that church plant training curriculum, we modeled it. And so what we did is we created an intentional curriculum. Okay. When you make leadership development intentional, then you can make it reproducible. And here's what I've discovered. When it's reproducible, it's unstoppable, because all I have to do is say, okay, hey, I'm going to disciple you in leadership this way. We're going to go through this content. We're going to have these conversations. We're going to cover these competencies. And when I finish, you're going to take this content, 2 to 3 people, same conversation, same thing. It's reproducible. And once you do that, it's unstoppable, because what you've given somebody is you've given them a pattern to follow in how to disciple a leader. Again, the American church thinks that content is the answer. Content is not the answer. America has more leadership content than any other nation in the world. All right. But yet surveys show in 2008 and 2018, Leadership Network, decade apart, did a survey that showed the church's number one struggle is leadership development. And we think content is going to solve the problem. Content is not the solution to America's leadership development problem. Process is. And it's going back to the ancient way of discipling leaders the way Jesus did. And then once that's modeled, you stamp it out and you begin to reproduce it. And I'll give you one more thing that, and I'm going to screen share this one. One more thing I think that keeps the American church from raising up more leaders and church planters. Okay. And this goes back to the power of the leadership pipeline. Once you have your pipeline defined, and so in this little example, you got whatever ministry this is, okay, team members, leaders, coach, and director. All right. So now I've got a roster, I call it a depth chart, and churches need this for every ministry. So when I planted my church, I had my team put together a chart just like this. We called it a depth chart, and they had to update it once a quarter. And so my directors had to turn in a list of names. I need to know who your coaches are. I need to know who your leaders are, who your team members are. I need to know how many you have, how many do you need based on both, and then that becomes your goal. Now, this thing is gold. I mean, it's one in the leadership pipeline process, in the book and in the consulting process I take churches through. That document right there for every single ministry is gold. I bet you $100. I bet you $100 that every pastor watching this call today gets a budget report every month in their inbox. Mm-hmm. How many get a people report? Mm-hmm. You get a budget report to say, here's how much money came in, here's how much money went out, and here's what we need to be aware of with our financial assets. But yet we don't do the same discipline with our human assets, which is much more important than the financial assets. Why do we not do that? Nobody taught us. Football coaches do it. That's how I learned to do it. I saw my football coach. He got a depth chart with all the names, offense, defense, all the names, who the backups, how deep the bench is. And so that's what we help churches do. We help them identify how deep is your bench. Let's get your pipeline language aligned across each ministry. Let's put the names in there. And there's a lot of deficiencies. There's a lot of gaps. But then, okay, now let's develop a plan to disciple people to the next levels so your staff doesn't stay as doers. Mm-hmm. And so that's if churches would just begin to look at the names of people in their pipeline, and then the exercise we have them do is we say, now, put an asterisk by anybody's name that's a pillar. I mean, you don't want to lose them. They're valuable. Something with their life circumstance might keep them from moving up at the time. Put an arrow up by anybody who has potential to move up, and put a cross with a circle around it by anybody 15 years old and older that you believe has potential to be a church planter.
Wow.
I took 16 churches in LA through our Multiplying Church workshop. Those 16 churches did that exercise with them. They had over 80 potential church planters in those 16 churches. The denomination I worked with vetted those names and identified 30 that can go through church plant assessment this year.
Wow.
Did the same thing in Boston with 20 churches. They identified over 50 potential church planters because we made them do that exercise. Wow. And one of the pastors, 2 years later, I was on a Zoom call with him. He starts weeping. And he said, Mac, remember when we wrote the names down? I said, yeah. He said, one of the names that was written down was my 17-year-old son. And he said, I didn't put his name down. My staff did. And he said, this evening, he's preaching his first ever sermon. Oh. And that's what happens when you make leadership development intentional.
Mm. Oh, goodness. I mean, I have a million questions from there. That is so good. But I'm just thinking about like who might be joining us on this webcast. I'm sure we have some lead pastors here. We probably have worship leaders and small group leaders and executive pastors, all kinds of church leaders at varying degrees joining us today. So what would you say if we could actually talk about for just a moment, what does it look like to actually disciple a leader? How do you disciple? You mentioned that you have 3 guys that you meet with. Like, how do you disciple a leader? And what would you tell those that are joining us today how they could get started, like right now, right away?
Yeah, I want to make it real simple. If everybody could do, and I'll walk you through that, but if everybody could do just this, find 2 to 3 people that you have a high belief in and meet with them every other week on a regular basis for 6 months to a year. Okay. If you do those 2 disciplines right there. All right. So the way I disciple my guys is identified 3 guys. And it's so funny because when I approached them and said, hey, man, I'd love to spend some time with you and disciple you in leadership. And here's what I see in you. And here's why I handpicked you. All 3 were blown away, which shocked me that they were so honored and eagerly said yes. And I told them, now listen, Jesus never lowered the bar for leadership. Jesus never lowered the bar of leadership, never. And so I said, guys, I'm going to be calling you to a higher standard. Okay. And so we're going to work on this. Anyway, so what I do is we scheduled out where we meet every other week. We meet in my room of the garage comfortable place, great for discussion. We meet an hour and a half. You don't have to. That was their choice. I scheduled it for an hour. They were like, man, this is too good. We need more time. I said, okay, up to you. So we moved it half hour earlier. So what I do is I give them content, study this content, put it into practice. Then we're going to get together and talk about it. So they read through the content, they learn the competency, they put it into practice at work, at home, and ministry. We get together and talk about it. And basically I'm saying, all right, what did God say to you through that content? How'd you put it into practice? What's God teaching you? What stood out to you from that content? I just ask them questions. I'm doing very little. I ask a question. They just start learning from each other, sharing what they're learning. Here's what I've discovered. One of the mistakes we make is we think people can only learn leadership when they're with us. Yeah. We need to leverage their discretionary time. So that's why, and I'll screen share something real quick. I created this discipleship series for leaders. You'll notice it follows the leadership pipeline. And you don't have to use this. You can use other books, but I wrote these to be used 1-on-3. It's short chapters on that teach these specific competencies on leading others. These on leading leaders, leading a department, and lead the organization comes out in January. Leading yourself will come out next year. So every level of the pipeline, we're teaching leaders these competencies. So let's say that you had an adult small group leader. Let's say that you had 2 potential adult small group leaders, and you go, man, I think they have the opportunity to be great small group leaders. So I'm going to take them through leading others. I'm not going to take them through all 8. I'm going to take them through making disciples, leading different personalities, facilitating discussion, empowering those around you, and identifying and apprenticing potential leader. I'm just going to take them through those 5. Okay. And so we meet every other week. They read the disciple making chapter. We get together, we talk about it. In my group, I give them the opportunity to practice that skill. I ask them how they're practicing it at work, at home. And then once they go through these and we agree that they're ready to step into leadership, then we empower them to step into that leadership role, whatever it is. And so each ministry can look at those 8 competencies and pick 5 that's relevant for them, or we have a chart that you can use for that. But anyway, it's as simple as giving them the content, tell them to read it, and let's get together, talk about it, and make them practice it so they're learning. Now, people go, yeah, but our leaders, they don't want to participate in leadership development. Can I tell you why? All right. People value what adds value to them. The church is notorious for wasting our time when it comes to leadership development events. And people know it. And so you invite them into leadership development. They go, no, thank you. Here's my conviction, Christine. The church raising up the best leaders on the planet. We've got the best book ever written. We got the best model that ever walked, and we got the Holy Spirit that resides within us. Why in the world is the church not raising up the best leaders walking this planet and transforming the culture around us? That's why leadership development is crucial in the church today. And again, I don't even like the word disciple. I don't even like the word leadership development. This is why discipling leaders is so crucial, and following a pathway so they're learning to lead at sequential levels and releasing them, empowering them. If the church would understand, we're not developing leaders to turn our ministry widgets. We're developing leaders to live a biblical lifestyle of leadership. It's not leadership development in the church. You know what we do? Here's our policies, procedures manual. Shadow Joe for 2 weeks. He'll show you where the snacks are and where the restrooms are. My goodness gracious, that's not leadership development. It's teaching people competencies to lead like Jesus.
Right.
Anyway, so that's...
You're not passionate about this at all, are you?
and here's the thing. It frustrates me because if a halfway educated kid from West Virginia can meet with 3 guys in disciple and leadership, anybody could do it. And here's the thing. My 3 guys, we're on the text thread. I put them on. As soon as you're discipling leaders, put them on the text thread. And I text them almost every day. sending them additional articles, videos, asking questions, getting interaction. So it's not, well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. No, right. I'm in their life every day.
And this is while you're running an organization, while you're, going
traveling every week,
traveling. And yeah, exactly. So you find the time to deeply invest into these three people.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, I travel every week. I've got 14 coaches. I've got 5 staff members, and it's busy, but those 3 guys, they know they are a priority in my life. And so I got a call from one of them, a text last night from one of them, said, man, I just got to talk to you. I got to talk to you. It was Sunday night. And I'm like, absolutely. And we jumped on a FaceTime call and talked through some stuff. And, if it had been most other people besides my team, the 5 on my team and these 3 guys, nobody else gets that level of access. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Not even my coaches. If one of my coaches called me on Sunday afternoon like that, hey, can I talk something through it? Yep, call me Monday. But these 3, they are top priority. And they know that I'm expecting them to reproduce one day. They know that.
Right. That's right. And it really does model Jesus's ministry and leadership development, because, at one point he's got literally thousands and thousands of people showing up to hear him preach or watch him do miracles. And yet he had his 3 and he had his 12, and they were his ultimate priority. You notice so many times the crowds gather and Jesus pulls the disciples in to speak to them, not to speak to the crowds, mm-hmm. but sometimes the crowd would watch and kind of listen into what was happening, but that was his priority, was those 12 guys, and especially the 3.
Great insight. One of my favorites is when he went to Tyre and Sidon, and it says he goes to a house where no one would see him, find him, so nobody would know he was there. Mm-hmm. And he's teaching his 12. And a lady shows up and says, hey, my daughter she's got possessed with a demon. I need you to come help. And he said, no. Right. Mm-hmm. And she said, please. And he said, no. And she said, even dogs get the scraps. He said, girl, your faith is so great. Go home. Your daughter's healed. And I have to point out what he didn't do. He didn't say, hey, guys, talk amongst yourselves. I'll be back in about an hour. Let me go help this lady. No, he said, my priority is you. Training you 12, that's my priority. Now, her faith, I'm going to deal with that, because that was pretty impressive. So I'm going to give her what she wants, but I'm not leaving you, because this is the priority.
Yeah. And I think too, if all American Christian leaders could grasp all of this, we would see a revival that we've never seen before. Like, truly, we would see churches revitalized. We would see churches strengthened. There would be such I know that this would bring, such a greater anointing of the Holy Spirit. There, like if every leader could actually get this at every level of leadership.
This is what we have to aspire to and have a vision for, is volunteer leaders reproducing themselves. Mm-hmm. Because I can take this book right here, take 3 people through it, and then tell them, hey, you take it, and start taking 3 people through it, right? A volunteer leader can do it. And I'm seeing churches where they are doing it and they love it. One lady told me, she said, I was getting ready to quit the leadership role because I'm bored. I've been doing it for 12 years. Now I get to develop other leaders. Oh my goodness. And we've got other people telling us, my church is providing better leadership development for me than my company is. Now that excites me. But you begin to develop leaders who truly understand biblical leadership, that's leading and leading leaders. Now all of a sudden, we can't just be content to disciple people to live like Jesus. We have, in our culture today, we have to disciple them to lead like Jesus, because leaders influence culture. And that's the beautiful thing about what Jesus did. That word apostle, when he said, choosing you to be my apostle, we know it means to speak on behalf of somebody. But 400 years before Jesus, that word was used to speak of an admiral of a ship who was sent out by a king to explore unexplored territories, find unconquered territories, uninhabited territories, pull up on that shore and establish a colony that's reflective of the culture of the king. So when I look at that word apostle, speak on behalf of is one meaning, but it also means culture shapers. We have to teach our leaders in our church. You are a culture shaper, not just in this church. Children's leader, we're teaching you to be a culture shaper, not just in that classroom. Yes, that's important. We want you to shape the culture in your home, shape the culture in your workplace, wherever it is you work. That's what a Christian leader does. They shape culture.
So good. So good. We are actually coming up on our hour already. This has gone by so fast. But I did want, if anyone has a question, feel free to pop into the Q&A feature. But as we're getting to the end of this time, I did want to make sure just to let you know that this book, The Multiplication Effect, that Mac has written, I have read it. It's fully highlighted. It is an incredible book. You can buy that wherever books are sold. And I did want to give you just an opportunity, Mac, any resources that you might want to share with our Vineyard family?
Yeah, the Discipling Leaders series that I mentioned, there are books for every level of the pipeline that teach specific competencies. And every competency, by the way, is paired with a character trait. So when you read the chapter on navigating conflict, you're also learning patience. And so what I say is we're going to take the competency and we're going to supercharge it by pouring a character trait on it that supercharges it. So not only you're discipling them in competency, you're discipling them in character. And we've got, for your listeners, we've got a discount code. So if they go to multiplygroup.org and put Vineyard Leader 10, Vineyard Leader, all caps, 10, on our website, they get any of our resources 10% off. And we have priced those lower than what's on Amazon, by the way. So they might be able to compare that and see what's the better price.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to include all those links both in the chat right now and also when we do the follow-up after we've concluded today. So if you're catching up, if you weren't able to make the live webcast and you're kind of watching, we will send all of this out in the email so that you have all of that information. And Mac, would you be okay if we share some of those slides that you shared with today that we can?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send those over. Yep.
Great. Well, Mac, it has been an incredible honor to have you today. And I feel like we've gotten this much, and I feel like there's so much more that we could dive into. So I'm just going to have you back at some point and maybe have you come in and speak at one of our events or one of our trainings. So thank you so much for joining us today. And you are definitely a blessing to our movement.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mac, you have a good one. Bye, everybody.